Hi, Lauren. Welcome to the podcast. We are so excited to have you here and hear all about what you do in your classroom with Academic Talk. We are very excited.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, Lauren, I'll jump in. I would love to know more about your school-wide goal on oracy. And I think it would be helpful for our listeners too, for you to define oracy in that response to, your school-wide goal on oracy and like what that looks like.
Sure. Oracy is the ability for anyone to articulate ideas, develop understanding, and engage with others through spoken language. So, our students are learning through talk and learning how to talk. They are deepening their knowledge through talk that has been planned, modeled, scaffolded, and structured for them.
Amazing. And so, how did your school choose to focus on oracy, and what is the actual goal for your school?
The goal was originally created so that students would be speaking more in every single lesson, regardless of content. So, oracy has become a mechanism for us for teaching and not something that we're doing in addition to everything else. So it's not this added component to our day, it's how we are facilitating learning for students. So they are constantly speaking. We expect students to speak multiple times throughout a lesson. In fact, we know like the most effective teachers are requiring students to speak 3 to 5 times per minute. For shorter responses, and then giving students an opportunity to speak once a minute for like more thoughtful questions. So students at our school are speaking several times a lesson. They know it's not an option. We require them to speak in complete sentences always, regardless of whether we're asking them an academic question or it's something else. So we've really created an environment where students are constantly speaking.
That's so cool. So why is this important to your school? And I would love to hear why is it important to you in your classroom and what it, a little bit of like what it looks like there.
Yeah. I think if we are asking students to learn something new, their background knowledge is largely invisible to us unless they are talking. So we need to be asking them questions and they need to be given the opportunity to speak. So it's really become the foundation for how I quickly gather what students know about a topic and what they do not know. I think it's also incredibly important for preparing them for the future, for when they have a job and they're asked to converse with coworkers. They need to be able to develop a claim and provide evidence to support that and reasoning. And so it's not just an academic skill, it's a lifelong skill. And their voice is what is going to create opportunities for them down the line. And we're really trying to hone those talk skills so that they have as many opportunities as possible.
Yeah, I love that your whole school is focusing on this. That is really admirable that it's not just you alone in your classroom. And I also love that you all think of it not as something separate. You sometimes see those, oh, we have speaking and listening standards we have to meet, and now that's
Right.
a whole nother thing and it's more time.
Right.
And that's stressful as a teacher always. So I love that you see it as like that's how we get to what we're teaching.
Right. And I think something that's made this incredibly fluid for our teachers is that every single time we meet for professional development, some component of our PD is focused around oracy and how we are promoting these practices in our classrooms and just different strategies so that it's not just something we've talked about once or twice, we continually come back to it. And I think that's really important for everyone, but also for teachers who are new to the building and who are trying to establish those routines in their classrooms as well.
Yeah. So that's what we want to hear about now. We want to hear about those routines because, just you can't just ask students to talk more, right? You have to be able to make them into some like structures and routines that they know. And so, can you tell us about some of the more of the small scale ones, the ones you do all the time, every day, that are within your lessons?
Sure. So I guess before I jump into that, I'll just say that we have, from the very beginning of the year, we establish different routines in our classrooms for speaking, for listening, whether it be through, sorry, I just lost my train of thought again. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Can I pretend like you just asked me that question again?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, sorry. So from the very beginning of the year, or at least in my classroom, we provide students with sentence stems so that if they're in a situation where they're not sure how to respond, they have that scaffold in place. At this point in the year, a lot of them don't even need that. However, I think it's helpful for new students to see what this looks like and to have something to fall back on. We are, from the start of the day, from morning meeting on, students are turning and talking with a partner. They're turning and talking with their table. So setting that foundation with low stakes tasks is helpful. A couple of strategies that I employ throughout the day, we use a traverse, which is where students line up and they move down a line and answer and elaborate on a question that is posed. So for example, yesterday in math, I had them stand up and the question I first posed was, is it possible for a triangle to ever have parallel sides? And they had a minute to think. They shared. Their partners have to repeat back to them what they said. So it's not just about eliciting responses, it's also about encouraging the listening and then adding on to what their partner said. So it's not just, we don't see kids just wanting to speak. We're requiring them to listen and elaborate and start to build conversations. At the beginning of the year, it's harder for that to take place. They want to just share what they know and they want to add their own ideas. And so it's really, we have to take time out to plan and have them listen back. So sometimes I'll record them in a conversation and say, what did you notice about this conversation? And almost immediately, students will say, oh, I noticed we weren't elaborating on what each other would say. And some students will say, I noticed that we say we want to add on to what they said, but then we're just introducing a new idea. So it's a harder skill to develop than it would seem. But once we get there, they really are having really meaningful conversations. Another strategy that we use is a mix and mingle. So students are moving throughout the room. It's a great way to get them up and moving. If they need a brain break, you pose a question, they pause, they discuss, we move again. And so they're adding on to their response each time, using that academic vocabulary and sharing what their previous partner said so that it's not just the same canned response each time.
Yeah, you mentioned one of the tasks you use for the traverse, but can you, I'm just thinking, what kinds of tasks or questions would you ask for a turn and talk, like you said, a low stakes kind of question, versus ones where you would say, okay, this is worth us getting up, doing the traverse or mix and mingle so that they're listening, they're able to go back and forth in this conversation. Can you think of the difference between those kinds of questions you would ask?
Sure. So typically for the traverse, I would ask a more thought-provoking question. So something that's coming up is students will be asked beyond, and this is shifting from math to ELA, but they would be asked to think about beyond the loyalist and patriot perspective during the American Revolution, what are some other perspectives that are important for us as the learner to take into account. So we would be looking for them to talk about the perspective of African Americans or the Native Americans or people who were on the fence. They didn't know, they didn't really connect with one side or another, the Quakers. So that would be more of a typical Traverse discussion.
So there's
And
lots
then-
of different answers they
Yes.
could be listening for and talking about.
Exactly. And so then that way they are not just, like I said, they have to repeat back to them what they said, and then they have to add on, and then they're moving down the line and they're sharing what their previous partner said. But that could go on for probably 15 minutes without having to like stop and pull everyone back together, because at that point we've had, or the students have engaged in so much learning and have read a number of texts and have developed the vocabulary that they're very easily able to do that. A mix and mingle, we could do something similar, but that's a little bit more low stakes. That would be something we use morphology as part of an extra piece of ELA. So I might ask them, stand up. They do the mix and mingle, and I ask them to use a prefix or a root word in a sentence, and then they share back. So really it's about just keeping them talking and engaged. So I'll use that more when I feel like they need a break and they need to get up and move. But I also want it to be purposeful, and I don't want to like have everything devolve into chaos.
But I even see even with that one, but especially the Traverse that you mentioned, like they might go in with just one thought, right? But then by the time they go and sit back down, it's like, oh, I have all these other perspectives or all these other words that use that root. They can hear from all their, it is about the talk, but it's also that they're learning from each other and have more ideas when they're done.
Yes. So another great thing about the Oracy strategies is that we will often use them prior to beginning a piece of writing, so that we are getting them thinking and they're hearing from multiple other students, and they are able to then, they've said it, so then they can much more easily go write about it. So we've found that if they can say it, they can write it. And this looks different for all students, right? We have very high achieving students whose writing is above grade level, but we've also found that for the students who need the most support, the Oracy has made such a difference, because they are constantly being asked to rely and think back on the knowledge that they've built. And so paired with a knowledge building curriculum, it's really a game changer.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think kids need to have something to talk about in order to really deeply talk, or even just, like you said, like get the juices flowing on like a surface level, even with a vocabulary term or morphology. They have to be able to put it into context, and to be able to do that effectively, you need to have something to talk about.
And then to write about.
Exactly.
I love thinking about Oracy as the bridge to writing. And I know sometimes writing can be the bridge to Oracy too. Do you have any thoughts on that, Lauren?
Yeah, I think it can go both ways. I a lot of times will do like a think, write, pair, share. And so that, we want them to think about what they know and elaborate on a topic beforehand and then go share. I think that's helpful to get some basic ideas down on paper. Big picture though, I really think that the speaking and listening piece of it really supports the writing so much. And even in a way where students pair up and they can fill out an outline pretty quickly about a specific question, and then they can go back and they can refer to their text and their different sources and add to it through writing. But I think the talking about it beforehand is so powerful for so many of them.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. I love that you said if you can say it, or if they can say it, they can write it. That's 100% true. That's like my big takeaway here. So All right, so I'm thinking about how you manage all of this in your classroom. There's a lot of routines, and I'm sure there's a lot of practice and a lot of preparation and a lot of setup. So would you share with us how you manage all of these routines within your classroom?
Sure. I think it's really important to think about both like strategic like talk moves and when you're going to use them. So like I mentioned previously, we pull a lot of our questioning from the curriculum, the writing pieces of it, small or large, but also thinking about where are students sitting, who are they going to turn and talk with when it's just a quick turn and talk, right? So we set that up from day one. This is your shoulder partner. These are like when I say table talk, you're turning and everybody at the table is looking at each other. One person is speaking at a time, and I'll stop them and I'll say, I see 3 people at table 2 talking. Stop, start again. And so we really practice that from day one so that when I do give them those opportunities, they understand one person is speaking at a time. They have signals that we use to show agreement, disagreement, they want to add on, that sort of thing. We have those sentence stems both on the board and on a card ring at their table so that they can grab those if they need them. We utilize the vocabulary wall so that they have access to that. So we just have all of these pieces that are there to serve as a support. And at this point in the year, it's a pretty fine-tuned machine.
Can you share with us the gestures? Like when I remember using this one, like I agree, like this, just the sign language gestures, like I agree, I disagree.
Yeah, they do this if they want to build on to what somebody else is saying.
Can you share what you're doing, Lauren? For
I know I didn't do it either.
Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
it's hard to explain.
Sorry.
Put your hand into a fist and then take one hand and put it over the other one to add on. Yeah?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And then what I did was some sign language. So if you Google sign language, I agree, you'll see the motion. It's just your thumb and your pinky finger out and move it forward and back from your chest, essentially. I'm just doing it higher up.
And then they shake their hand to show that they might disagree, or I don't know what.
Yeah, like a flat palm back and forth. Like, no.
Back and forth, to signal that they disagree and would like to share why they disagree.
That's awesome. Can I just jump in real quick? I know like it seems so simple, and I'm probably preaching to the choir with teachers here, but the way you just like said that like you make sure they know who their partner is and like you already have that planned. Mm-hmm. I know it seems so simple, but I watch my son's 6 and he goes to different sports, and like there's some that he goes to where they'll say, find a partner. And it is just chaos when that happens versus when they're like, you two together, you two together, you two together, done.
Exactly. Yes. So at their tables, they have an assigned shoulder partner. When we get up and do a mix and mingle, I play music. When the music stops, they go back to back with the person closest to them. And that's it. They know they're not moving around the room trying to find their best friend. We just have that routine in place, and we practice that, right? And I think teachers have to become comfortable with practicing these things and saying, that didn't meet my expectation. Go back to your seats. We're going to try this again. Because you don't want to be having that conversation in January, right? Like at this point, we are dialed in. We are focused on the content, and we don't have time to send you back to your seats and try it again. But I will, right? Like those are just things that you have to do after major breaks and just to revisit the expectations. So I think teachers just need to get comfortable with if it doesn't look and sound the way you want it to sound, try it again.
You just answered the question I was going to ask is like, how do you keep it from getting to be too chaotic? And what I'm hearing you say is practice these routines, practice them a lot in the beginning of the year, and then reset those expectations through structured practice after big breaks. Even if on a random Tuesday, it's just not going the way. Like, I'm just thinking maybe there's an assembly
full
everybody's
moon.
pumped for, and they're all out of control and just really psyched up about it. So you're going to reset that expectation throughout the day, throughout the weeks, throughout the year, as needed, and just do a lot of practice or just resetting.
Yes.
Awesome. So I'm wondering how you might do this if you said like this is like something that you do in your classroom and your school has these Oracy goals. Are other teachers in your school doing it the same way? Are they doing it a little bit differently? Does your school do this like big picture for planning? Like, how does it look in your school building? And then what happens if like you're doing things a little bit differently? Like, is that okay? How does it work?
Yes, we have an incredible amount of autonomy with how we roll this out in our own classrooms, right? We all are aware of the different Oracy practices that are available to us, but I think everyone has the 2 or 3 that really make the most sense to them and are easiest for them to implement with their students. So this might not look exactly the same in every single class, but I can say that every single teacher in this building is thinking about the questions that they're asking their students, thinking about how they're asking them so that students are having the opportunity to respond as frequently as possible. I have a colleague in kindergarten who I collaborate with pretty closely, and I was in her room before winter break, and the way that the kindergartners are able to discuss the in science they were learning about tugboats and forces, and just the conversations that 5-year-olds can have when you structure the environment so that they're required to talk is incredible. It really is special, and so you see this at different levels and throughout the building, but everybody is focused on it, and we see that when we get a new group of students each August, and you of course have to like remind students what this looks like and sounds like, but since it's a school-wide goal, we don't have to explain why it's important. Students understand why it's important. They feel more confident because they are constantly being asked to recall information and build upon each other's ideas. So I think the main takeaway is that we have students who feel empowered and confident to speak about things. In fact, we hear from parents often that they come home, they get in the car, and they share, what they've learned at school, and the parents are just blown away by the vocabulary and the way that students are able to sustain a conversation about a certain topic.
That's amazing. Wait a minute. Sorry, I'll pause now. I totally was like, wait a minute. What was I going to ask you? I'll pause. Okay. So, Lauren, I think it's amazing that you got to go see a kindergarten teacher and what it looks like in that classroom. How often do you get to do that? Or was it just like, oh, we're buddies, I'm going to stop in because I feel super comfortable? Or are those activities like structured through like your school? Like, is it something where you're like, okay, I get to go see this teacher this day? I remember I had an amazing principal who facilitated those opportunities for us at one particular school that I worked in. And it was so amazing just to step into other teachers' classrooms, even if it wasn't the same grade, and just see how they were facilitating very similar focuses or foci that we were working on in our classroom.
Yeah, that's something that we are currently building out is the peer observation model. We have a mentor-mentee program here, so the mentors go in and observe their mentee, and then we go and visit a classroom that's doing something or focusing on a goal that our mentees might have. So we are popping in and out of classrooms to get ideas, to see best practices, So hopefully in the next few months, that will be more of an opportunity for everyone. I do think it's so incredibly powerful to be able to go in and see what's happening in other classrooms. I can be in a classroom for 5 minutes and walk out with 3 new ideas of how to do something. And I think it just keeps things fresh, and it prevents you from becoming stagnant. So I just think it's the more that we can do that, I think the better.
Yeah, Lauren, I want to switch gears a little bit here. We know we talked about those like quick routines, some a little bit more extended, but still ones you might do more on a daily basis. But I know you also do some more extended, in-depth discussions, like the Socratic seminar type of discussions, which they can be tough to manage for sure. So we want to hear from you. What are some tips you have on how teachers can manage those types of discussions?
Yeah. So I think I always start with identifying the question that's going to be asked, and then the like sub questions that might come off of that. And so it's all built upon the knowledge building curriculum, whether it be in ELA or science or social studies. And so students come to a discussion with their research, with their text, with their notes. We pose the question ahead of time. We give them, the planning time to go through and find evidence and think about how they're going to elaborate on the evidence and their reasoning. And then before we have the actual discussion, whether it be a fishbowl or a Socratic seminar, or sometimes I'll split the class in half so that students are given more opportunities to speak. We have like a pre-discussion meeting where students are determining a speaking and listening goal for themselves. They're thinking and reflecting on the last time we've done this. So I pulled a couple of examples. One of my students before break said they wanted to seek first to understand, and to them that meant asking questions and finding their voice, but also knowing when to listen and knowing when to help other people find their voice if they felt like someone wasn't being given the opportunity to share. Some other goals that they had were to synergize around a topic so that the discussion stayed, we maintained we stayed on the question, we weren't veering too far off, but also introducing new evidence so that they aren't all sharing the same evidence, which can be hard in a fourth grade class because we only have so many texts that we have, used throughout the module. Some other goals that they have set are around maintaining eye contact and showing that they're listening by nodding and using our hand signals, and knowing how to respectfully disagree instead of saying you're wrong, right? It's not you're wrong, it's I disagree, my ideas are different, and this is why. So those are all goals that they came up with during our pre-meeting, and it's really cool to see them reflecting on their previous discussions and seeing how they want to grow and become better speakers and listeners for that matter.
I love that they all have different things, so that helps kind of manage the whole discussion. If you're keeping it on track and you're making sure everyone's voice is heard, it kind of helps the discussion to flow a little bit better if everyone has their part. But I'm wondering do you explicitly teach some of those things at some point, like I'm guessing at the beginning of the year, because I'm not sure that fourth graders would necessarily know how to do those things.
Yeah. In our first module for ELA, there's a whole group discussion that is suggested, and I always take it and I break it up and I hold 5 different discussions. And so I'll pull a small group of students back to my table, and what I do is I always put a student in charge. So they will pose the question, and then they sort of are the facilitator, and I just listen. But something I do in that first discussion is, it's called a spider web. I write everyone's name down on a paper and I draw lines to show who's speaking, like, so that I'm getting an idea of how many times each person spoke. And then I add notes to that paper as well. Oh, they responded to what the person before them said, or they brought up an entirely new idea. Just so that I can sort of see. And then we share that. We finish the conversation. I usually time it. And at the end of the conversation, I say, how do you think that went? And they're really like pretty critical of themselves at this point, even at the beginning of the year. So they usually have more like feedback for each other than I do. But then I share, like, this is how many times this person talked. And I think next time we need to make sure that we're focusing on asking everyone else what they think before we share one more thing, right? And so it really is like, and if I feel like a conversation is going off the rails a little bit, I'll pause them and I'll jump in, because I don't want it to be a waste of time. But sometimes if you give them the time to grapple and sort of try to get it back on track themselves, they'll get there. So I think it's just about knowing, like, okay, we're too far gone here. I need to intervene. But they've gotten to the point where, they're pretty cognizant of what's going on, and they'll like nudge each other if they feel like somebody is talking too much and not giving, equal talk time to the rest of the group.
And can I ask just one logistical question about
Sure.
this that I don't think I ever mastered very well? Do you grade a discussion? And if you do, how do you keep track of what's happening during you mentioned the spider web, which I think would be one helpful tool. Is there anything else you do that helps to like keep track so that you can, or do you just not grade it? I'm just curious.
Well, so it goes in, it's participation. The most important part of it for me is the feedback for the student. So
On that specific goal that they had to.
Yeah. So we shared before the discussion what their goal is, and we also I'll look at the speaking and listening standards. We'll look at those there in their ELA materials. So they'll highlight one that they want to focus on, and so when they bring their packet back to me, I'll see what's highlighted, or they'll have it out on their table so I can see. And it's a range, right? So it's like developing, on grade level, like meeting expectations, exceeding expectations. So I'll let them know that. But then I think the verbal and like the written feedback is also really important, and I try to do that pretty immediately. So if we have a whole group discussion, I'll stop and we'll stop the discussion, and at the end I'll ask, does anybody have any feedback for each other? And they'll share out, and they really do at this point have good feedback for each other. But then I'll share out some things that I noticed different students doing, and then I'll make sure that they get the written feedback pretty immediately, so that they know that's something that they need to work on for the future.
Yeah, those goals are helpful.
Do you share the spider web with them? Is that
do.
something? Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like that'd be really helpful visually for me to see if I were a student in your class, that just kind of see oh, okay, big picture, where do I fit in? Mm-hmm. And okay, this person is talking a little bit more, and this person's not talking, so maybe I need to engage this person a little more. I'm sure you could coach them to do that, but that seems like such a helpful tool.
Definitely. And something that I did this year for the first time is I had kept a couple of spider webs from last year, and before the first discussion, I put it under the doc cam. I had crossed the names out from the students, but I asked, what do you notice about this spider web? And it was one where I had two students who really dominated the conversation, and I wanted the students to pick up on that. And I said, what questions does this spider web elicit? Because they've seen them, right? I'm not the only one in the building who's using them. And so they had good questions. They said, well, did this person just not speak? Did they not want to share? Were they absent a lot? Did they not have the completed organizer? And they had some really good questions. So, I think encouraging them to be thoughtful about that as well is helpful. So
that's awesome. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm going to go again. 'Cause did you hear my email ding? You may not have. No. This is so amazing. I feel like our teacher friends listening have learned so much. I know I would love to see one of those spider webs. And I think there's so many great pieces of information that you shared today. I even especially love the idea of like you breaking your class into two during some of the bigger discussions so that there's not as much like downtime, if you will, for the other kids. Like, for example, in the Socratic or in the Fishbowl, like what a great little tip. Like, once you have those routines in place, you can break it into two and kind of have them run it, and you're just facilitating between the two. Yeah. So amazing. We're so glad that you came on to talk with us, Lauren. We can't thank you enough.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.